scary, Grandma. It's fun to be dead.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, The Mummy is back, not the way you remember it. This is not Brendan Fraser cracking jokes in the desert, or Tom Cruise running from digital sandstorms. This time, it's Lee Cronin's The Mummy, a full-blown supernatural horror from Warner Brothers, hitting theaters near you on April 17. And because the first screenings have already happened, early reviews are all over X, trade sites, and horror circles. If you don't have the time to scroll through every thread and article before buying a ticket, don't worry. This video is your one-stop roundup of what critics are actually saying about this movie. Let's begin, shall we? Before we get into reactions, quick setup. The movie follows the young daughter of a journalist who disappears into the desert without a trace. 8 years later, she suddenly comes back, and what should be a joyful reunion turns into a living nightmare. The cast includes Jack Raynor, Laia Costa, May Calamawy, Natalie Grace, and Veronica Falcone. And the whole thing is written and directed by Lee Cronin, who you probably know from Evil Dead Rise and The Hole in the Ground. This is also a complete reimagining of the Mummy brand. Let's talk about early reactions, because critics are not being shy. Comic Books' Chris Killian straight up calls it the most terrifying and disgusting mummy movie you'll ever see. Unrelenting in some ways that I can't go into because spoilers, and it's definitely not for everyone. But if you enjoyed Evil Dead Rise, chances are you'll love this. Slash Films' Bill Bria echoed that vibe in his own reaction on X, writing, "Lee Cronin's The Mummy is a nasty, gruesome, mean-spirited, and disgusting little shit of a movie. In other words, it's a ripper. Plays like if Cronin saw Bring Her Back after binging The Omen, The Vanishing, and Brain Dead, and then said, bet. Bit long in the tooth, but she bites. Hard." So the overall picture so far, critics are basically saying this thing is gross and disgusting, and that's a compliment. If you're expecting sandstorms with faces and big adventure set pieces, you might want to adjust those expectations. Slash Film explains that Cronin's movie is a far smaller scale affair focusing on a family who's reunited with their young daughter, only to discover she's very different from the sweet little girl they remember. Michael Lee from Nerds of Color, posting as @IamMichaelJLee, summed it up like this. #Lee Cronin's The Mummy trades spectacular for intimate domestic horror, turning family trauma and grief into something eerie and deeply unsettling. It's a visceral body horror with superb squelching sound design. That trade spectacle for intimate domestic horror line is important because it's basically the mission statement. This movie isn't about giant CGI armies of the undead. It's much closer to a possession movie smashed together with a missing child thriller and Cronin's signature one creepy kid energy. Journalist Brandon Davis also stressed how intense it feels to actually sit through, calling it the most effed up movie I've ever watched in a theater, and praising its ghoulish scares and intimately textured violence, adding that he had to look away numerous times. One name that keeps coming up across all these reactions is Natalie Grace, who plays the daughter who comes back from the desert. Courtney Howard called the film a freaky as F creep show. Scary, scream-worthy, and squirm-inducing. Natalie Grace is the MVP in a Linda Blair-inspired performance, a buffet of split diopter shots. Michael Lee also highlighted how much of the movie sits on her shoulders, calling it a visceral body horror, with that squelching sound design, and making it clear that the kid is right at the center of all that nastiness. So if you're curious about whether this mummy has a standout performance to match the horror, early critics are pretty united. Natalie Grace is the one to watch. Now let's talk about how far this thing really goes, because the rating boards have already tipped their hand. Screen Rant and other outlets noted that the MPA slapped it with an R rating for strong, disturbing, violent content, language, gore, and brief drug use, which is fairly standard wording, but overseas boards went even harder. The BBFC in the UK gave it an 18 certificate, and similar 18+ ratings popped up in Brazil, Canada, Hungary, Greece, and Taiwan, with reports that one scorpion scene in particular is really nasty and disturbing. So, between the 18 ratings, the body horror comments, and all the gross and disgusting quotes, this really seems aimed at people who thought Evil Dead Rise wasn't quite nasty enough. Of course, it's not all praise without caveats. Even the positive reviewers are pointing out that this thing runs a little long. Bill Bria calls it a bit long in the tooth, but she bites. Hard. Tyler Disney had a similar reaction, writing, "I've seen The Mummy, and I can confirm Brendan Fraser is not in the movie, but other than that, I actually enjoyed this movie. It blends horror and comedy in the perfect way. A tad bit long, but enjoyable. Third act goes ballistic." So if you're going in expecting a tight 90-minute scream ride, be prepared for something more drawn out and, according to critics, a bit more emotionally heavy than your typical jump scare reboot. One thing critics and trade sites keep stressing is that this is not a spiritual sequel to the Fraser movies. Zoom TV describes it as a film that aims to reimagine the beloved franchise that previously starred Brendan Fraser and Tom Cruise. while Out Now literally warns that anyone who goes to see Lee Cronin's The Mummy expecting a fun romp with Brendan Fraser will likely leave the cinema not only with an avoidable disappointment, but also with a proper shock. Putting it all together, here's the picture they're painting. Lee Cronin's The Mummy is small-scale, domestic, grief-driven horror that trades spectacle for intimate domestic horror, and leans heavily into body horror and sound design. Natalie Grace is getting Linda Blair comparisons. The ratings boards are throwing 18s around like candy, and almost every early reaction mentions people squirming, looking away, or feeling physically uncomfortable at least once. The only consistent downside so far is that the 133-minute runtime and some bizarre choices that might lose more casual viewers. As for whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave that to you. Let me know in the comments, are you up for a mean-spirited, disgusting little mummy movie, or are you secretly hoping for another pulpy desert adventure? If you found this roundup useful, don't forget to like the video, share it with your horror-loving friends, and subscribe to the channel for more early review breakdowns. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!